This is Rob Barnett, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion today. This is a special series where we're going to talk about the circular economy, the energy transition, recycling, materials demand. I think we'll have a number of great things to discuss. And for the conversation today, we've got some special guests. We've got Peter Evans, who I've known for a long time. He's currently the Chief Strategy Officer at McFadden. And by the way, Peter, I just happened to have found this
Oh, wow.
today. For anyone who can't read it,
Dawn of
it's
the new age.
Don a scenario. It's Peter and I go back 20 plus years, and we worked on this a long time ago. I'm reticent to actually flip it open and read much of what we said, but that'll be a conversation for another day. We've also got Christian van Maaren, who's the CEO of the Excess Materials Exchange. So they're our two external guests, and also joining from Bloomberg Intelligence as well in London is Alon Olsha, who covers some of the big diversified miners for us. So I think he's got a unique perspective on some of the things happening in the materials side of the equation. So that's who we've got at the table. Everyone's in London but me, so sorry I can't be there for the party, but I still look forward to the conversation we're going to have here today. When I think about this topic generally, one of the things that comes to mind, because I'm deep in energy nerd land, and I like looking at the IEA reports or any of these other things that talk about net zero, and kind of how we all have this sense that the world is changing, and that the future of energy is going to look quite different perhaps than it looks today. And I think probably a big piece of that maybe folks still haven't got their head around is that the energy transition is going to require a lot of raw materials, copper, cobalt, nickel, lithium, all these sort of things that some of Alon's companies probably are going to be bringing to the market. But I also think that scrap and recycling, or circular economy, however you want to call it, is going to play a role there. So, Alon, I want to just come to you first, given that you've got a seat at the table for kind of hearing how these companies think about demand for these materials. And do they talk about circular economy much, and kind of how do you frame the energy transition when you think about the material side of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, they they absolutely talk about the circular economy. It's become more and more topical over the last few years. There's a recognition that the circular economy, recycling, secondary production will play a significant role in meeting the supply gaps going forward. I mean, there's no question where we are sitting today. There's currently not enough supply to meet demand, particularly from clean tech going forward. Interestingly, though, this is an important point, this isn't a resource scarcity problem. There's a lot of stuff in the ground. The problem here is one of cost and one of lead time. So copper's a great example, and it's a metal that gets spoken about a lot. We know electric vehicles use double the amount of copper than traditional conventional internal combustion engine vehicles. In offshore wind, that uses about 7 to 8 times more copper than coal or gas-fired power. So the potential increase in demand is really significant, and that applies to most metals geared toward the energy transition. So the kind of so-called precursor battery metals like nickel, cobalt, lithium. They also, they're not used in vehicles at all currently. They're used in electric vehicles, and of course, we know what the trend is there. But the interesting thing is, for copper, for example, over the next few years, the market's probably going to be relatively well supplied. Companies invested over the last few years, and you've got some new supply coming on stream. So the market looks okay. We should probably see a modest surplus. That means prices could be range bound. When prices are range bound, and currently we're at about $8,000 a ton, it's not sending the signal to producers to sanction projects. And they do have projects. There's probably certainly from our calculations, more than enough projects to meet demand for the next, probably for the next 10 odd years. But those projects are becoming more and more difficult to execute. Capital costs have increased, the operating environment is more challenging, there's resource nationalism, there's environmental pressures. So you really need much higher prices to incentivize management teams to kind of press the green light. So that does leave a likely gap. By the time prices do eventually respond, it'll be too late. We'll have a deficit emerging in the market. Then the price will react, but it takes 3 to 5 years to develop a mine once it's already fully defined, let alone a mine that hasn't a deposit that's been discovered that could take 10 years until it's developed. And so what we'll see is this constant interplay between supply, demand, and prices, this kind of feedback loop. And where supply is inelastic to price, we'll probably have to see innovations on the demand side and supply side. So we could see thrifting on the demand side, we could see material substitution, technology substitution, and on the supply side, and what we're already seeing is kind of new technologies coming to the fore, for example, allowing certain types of copper ore bodies to be leached, which wasn't the case previously. And that could allow them to, for example, exploit lower grade ores, which are in significant abundance. So there isn't enough material around. We do need other sources. Recycling is going to play a big role in meeting the supply gap, but it can't do it on its own. Can't do the heavy lifting on its own. Primary supply also needs to respond.
Okay, so thank you, Alon. Very nice set of comments there. Peter, I think I flipped through your slides. So you're over in London for this Marketplace Risk Global Summit. One of the slides I think actually aligns pretty well with what Alon just said, and the title of it is Global Demand for Battery Materials Outstripping Supply. You've got a number of nice charts kind of showing this mismatch between supply and demand. So when you think about the landscape, how do you see it unfolding? And what kind of role do you think the circular economy could play in helping balance the market? Because I think you think about this topic a lot these days.
Yeah, thanks. For sure. So there is this broader concept of the circular economy, but the question is, how do you execute on that? And so the area that we've been exploring is, can new business models come in to help facilitate that? So the area that we've been looking at in particular is this idea of marketplaces or platforms coming in. And what's interesting is in the areas in which we've just been discussing, there aren't actually platforms, but there could be. So then the question becomes, what are the conditions under which you would need to actually create these platforms? And here I'm talking about an entity that comes in, we call it a market orchestrator that matches supply and demand. And there's a bunch of things that need to happen for that to occur. And we don't have them right now, for example, in the battery space. So what we've been looking at and exploring in our panel yesterday was discussing is one component would be insurance. So are there insurance providers that could come in and help facilitate the market? You would have a market orchestrator matching supply and demand. And here we're talking about not supply and demand of fresh material, but of end-of-life batteries and things of that nature. So how do you acquire them? How do you create the reverse logistics system around that? How do you grade them to determine the end of, the useful life that may be left in them? If they don't have any, then they need to go back to scrap. If they do, they could potentially be reused in the power sector. So there's this whole potential for second life batteries in the power sector. But what's interesting is that some of these materials have, they're hazardous. They can catch on fire like lithium, and we've seen things of that nature emerge. So in order for these new business models to emerge, you may need some additional support to create that trust in the environment. And so what's interesting is there's a small number of innovative insurance companies that are emerging. These are kind of these insurtech companies that are beginning to look into this space. And they're beginning to create offerings that provide insurance for the end-of-life batteries. It also turns out that buyers of conventional vehicles pretty much understand what they're going to get when they buy a secondary vehicle. On the electric vehicle side, they don't. So there's a gap. There's an uncertainty for the buyers. So there's some interesting issues of how do you create that confidence of the secondary buyers of electric vehicles. Anyway, so these are nascent markets. They don't exist now, but the conditions as you just laid out suggest that we're going to see innovation, not just on the technology side, but on the business model and institutional side that could really create opportunities to match the back end recircular part of the marketplace. So that's what we're watching for and who those orchestrators are going to be to emerge into this space.
Yeah, Christian, I think this is a great setup for you to weigh in here. I think you're the real practitioner in the space. So tell us a little bit about kind of what your company is up to, and in your sense, are there hurdles like the insurance question that Peter just raised that are sort of limiting factors on this circular economy concept that we're talking about right now?
No, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. And so our platform we describe as sort of like as a dating site for secondary materials and waste. Because what we were seeing, we started the company about 6 years ago, is that you see all these sort of mega trends, right? Where you have the energy transition and you have governments seeing also the circular economy as a great way to meet their Paris Climate Agreement targets, because there is a huge overlap, and I think it's becoming more and more clear. So there's this groundswell that's really moving lots of industries towards more circularity, especially industries that are serving governments either directly or indirectly. And so we jumped onto that. But I think in the beginning years of our company, we really felt like we were a band playing at the wrong party, where we felt like we carried a pretty good tune, but nobody was listening. But that's changing. Also, to Alon's point, seeing that policy is changing, and people are really seeing the opportunity. And what we wanted to do, and that's also what we call the excess materials exchange, is to see if we can commoditize these resources that are currently locked into end-of-life products and materials and whatnot. And what we're seeing is that companies and people and organizations are throwing away extremely valuable materials because there's a lot of information asymmetries. They don't know what the actual value is of the materials that they have, and they don't know where these materials could go as soon as they reach end of life. And then, to Peter's point, there's this trust issue where there's a lot of uncertainty of, well, what if something goes wrong during shipment or during the next use phase, that really keeps people from sort of jumping on this opportunity and unlocking all this value. So what we've done is we create passports for all these materials that contain all the the relevant details on these materials, so the next user knows what is in there and what the quality is and what the potential risks are. But also regulators understand what the potential hazards are for humans and the environment if those materials were to actually enter the environment. Then we track these materials, so we use all the identifiers that you have, like RFID tags, QR codes, and whatnot. And then we have the ability to use the information in those passports to also do what we would call like embedded impact calculations, where you understand, okay, what is the CO2 impact of these materials? So you also can make decisions on which materials to focus on first. And then lastly, to reduce the cost of transaction, because of course this is a very complicated market, lots of additional interactions over maybe a very traditional marketplace or maybe a very traditional way of doing business. So we rely very heavily on using AI and machine learning tools to reduce these transaction costs and find next users for these materials much quicker than you would normally do.
Okay, very interesting. Alon, I want to swing back around to you because I think the idea of information asymmetry is really interesting, and I'm curious if from the perspective of say a Glencor or BHP, are they actively participating in the circular economy concept, or do they just sort of see it as other supply that's out there and it kind of feeds into their sort of calculus around the supply demand balance, or yeah, so I guess I want a sense of like whether it's a sort of piece of the market that they are actually in, or whether it's something that they're just aware of existence out there.
That's actually a really timely question, because for the first time certainly in my memory, we've had a major mining company, that is Glencor, last month, they hosted a site visit, North America, to visit all their recycling operations. Now, Glencor has a massive recycling business, and they produce a lot of secondary product in a way that the other mining companies just don't have that kind of presence. The other mining companies tend to focus predominantly on mining. Glencor, as we know, it's not just a major mining company, it's also a huge trading company, and recycling and secondary production is a lot about trading, as has been alluded to already. So it's on the agenda. I mean, this is a business they've had for years, right? For decades, which they've slowly been building. And now they're asking investors to focus more on it and to start appreciating the potential and the role that Glencore plays in the circular economy. And importantly, the competence they have, because that's quite key. This is not a simple business. It's a complicated business. The value chain is quite long. It's quite fractured. There's not a lot of consolidation. It's a difficult thing to do, to recycle and extract material from a complex piece of scrap, from e-waste, for example, or from an electric vehicle battery, for example. I kind of like to think about baking a cake and then trying to turn the cake back into the flour, the egg, and the butter. It's kind of like that. Maybe not as difficult, but you get the analogy. So they're thinking about it, and I actually think that the other big mining companies as well, and certainly this is the sense we got recently from LME Week, which was hosted in London a few weeks ago, was mining companies are starting to talk about the circular economy, starting to talk about recycling and secondary production and the roles they can play. And it's not just the big mining companies, of course. Norsk Hydro, for example, one of the biggest aluminum producers in the world, they're investing heavily. That's where all their growth is coming from, in secondary production. China has capped primary aluminum supply, and so they're investing heavily as well in secondary facilities. So there's a huge focus, but it's not an easy thing to do. Some of the metals have fairly established recycling industries: copper, aluminum, steel. Although those need to expand, you need to have more secondary smelters. You need to have better scrap processing, shredding, sorting. So they need to increase in their sophistication. For battery metals or precursor battery metals, so nickel, cobalt, lithium, that industry is very much in its nascency. And again, it's a difficult thing to do, to extract those metals from an EV battery is technically complex. And at the moment, of course, you don't have the inventory, you don't have the stock. You'll get it at some point, but these batteries have quite a long life, and they have warranties, and they can be used for other purposes, in the power sector, in the energy industry. So, that secondary production or recycling in battery metals is one of, I think, the greatest challenges, and needs quite a lot of investment, which means it probably needs a lot of government support and policy support as well to make it happen.
Christian, I want to come back to you and just get a sense, given that you're actively working in the space with your platform, what's your sense on kind of what materials, what types of things are your clients really wanting to see the marketplace exist for? Is there a lot of focus on copper, battery materials? What's your sense on sort of what's the hot space within the circular economy at the moment?
Well, it's a great question. And I think to Alon's point, it's very, the battery space is still very nascent. So what we're seeing is that as governments are pushing this circular economy agenda, we see that construction and demolition is sort of our biggest market. And what we would also say is that it's still very much a supply-driven transition or market, where people say, oh, I have all these materials, I want to do something else with it other than conventional processing. So they're pushing all this stuff on the market, and they're asking us to find something for it that's sort of higher value than where it's currently going. Now, what we're seeing is that a lot more procurement people are also approaching us saying, oh, but we're looking for used steel, or we're looking for recycled concrete, and so that's very exciting, because that's really what we've been looking for. So we really get those two sides of the market. And I would say that steel is a big one. Plastic obviously is also another one, but maybe that's not very sort of topical. Basically everything related to construction. So most of our clients, I would say, are in the built environment space. So this is buildings, infrastructure like roads, waterways, and whatnot. And a lot of petrochemical players these days as well. We're expanding to Saudi Arabia. But I have to say, we're now also having conversations with some mining companies in Peru and Australia. So that's going to be probably something that we're going to be very active in next year.
Peter, I want to come to you on this idea as well. Most of our listeners are investors. They're active in the market. You've got a really interesting forecast from your presentation, and you talk about the circular economy growing from a $400 billion market to a $1.5 trillion market by 2030. And so I get the sense, okay, so let's say this is going to unfold as you envision it, but how do you think about it from an investment perspective? Would love to hear your thoughts if you have any sort of broad views on kind of how the investment community can play this.
Sure. So there's been forecasts of the size of the circular economy. The World Economic Forum put out that number of 1.5 trillion by 2030. I guess the question is, how is that going to happen? And as we've discussed, it's complicated. However, the question, I think, is are firms going to try to do this on their own? And we do see a lot of initiatives. Even companies like Caterpillar have a circular economy initiative. They take back certain equipment and they remanufacture it. So there's that happening. But I guess the point that I've been looking into is, what is the potential for going circular together? Bringing together groups of companies to actually create deeper liquidity in the market and actually have a marketplace orchestrator. We know that if we leave it to the general economy, there are these information asymmetries. There are these friction points that happen. And, the market is a beautiful place, but it is highly imperfect, as we know. So what's interesting about the platforms is and we know from watching the growth of Google and Amazon and Facebook, that platform business models are very, very powerful. And so if we can take this, and so what I've been looking at is, what percentage of the overall global circular economy will be powered by platforms? And so we looked at this, and we believe that actually most of the growth in the circular economy will happen through the creation of platforms. So something like 60%. So by 2030, of that 1.5 trillion you mentioned, it could be up to $860 billion of economic activity happening through marketplaces. And we're talking here about the full range. It could be in textiles, plastics, e-waste. And what's super interesting is that the energy transition is moving us from a world in which we extract materials, burn them, and they end up in the atmosphere. If you use more clean tech, what you're doing is you're mining, and this is what, you probably heard Dan Jurgen talk about, the shift from big oil to big shovel. We're extracting more materials, but these materials don't end up in the atmosphere. They're metals and other kinds of products that actually can be recycled. So the clean energy transition is pretty interesting, because it opens up new opportunities for this recycling if we can solve some of the complexity in this market. But we can actually not only reduce carbon emissions, we can actually help material flows and get them more circular. So I think your points about the mining industry kind of waking up to this and wanting a piece of the action is super interesting, right? Because if they stick with their traditional model, they're going to miss part of the value proposition. The question is that, are they going to try to do it alone, or are they going to potentially create a consortium and stand up a circular marketplace so they can all participate? The other is, do you always want to sell those materials? Why do you give them up? Because then you're going to have to buy them back. So then you open up really interesting questions about maybe shifting from a sell model to a leasing model. And so that you never give up that material. You actually own that lithium through its entire life cycle. So that's really interesting. And I don't know if the mining companies have fully gotten onto that, but when you're talking about shifting from a linear economy to a circular economy, it's not like all of these business models stay the same and you're just reapplying. No, they actually fundamentally transform in the economic value proposition. And if you have something very valuable like, these rare earth metals, you may want to keep access to them, and you do that from shifting to a leasing model. So anyway, looking into that, and then how would a platform facilitate that?
Very interesting. One of the big concepts in energy transition that some of the equipment suppliers are dealing with, if you look at a company like Vestas, right, and their ESG reporting, a lot of it has to do with the sustainability of the turbines and managing kind of the cradle to grave and how all that's going to work. And I think we're all as an industry still getting our heads around that to some extent.
That they produced wind turbine blades that could not be recycled. So I've heard that Vestas has been investing in doing R&D so that they actually manufacture a turbine blade that can be recycled. And that's pretty interesting as well, because the circular economy suddenly creates value that didn't exist before. So now companies start thinking about, hey, if there's value in recycling, let's design for recycling. So actually there's a big move afoot in the EV space so that the OEMs don't produce electric car batteries that can't be taken apart. Right, so that it enables that. So there's this complexity, but it's also the product design. So we're also going to see a shift in product design that's pretty interesting, and you actually may create more value if you create a product that can be recycled.
We're seeing that we're seeing that with some of our clients, where they would actually, buy stuff or build stuff which is slightly more expensive in the beginning, but has more value at end of life, so the total cost of ownership is actually lower. But those
Absolutely.
are really emerging things.
Well, I was going to observe that a lot of the wind industry is at the point where you're repowering sites at this point that were done, 20 plus years ago, because rough timeline for kind of when you might start to think about repowering, because first of all, the technology has improved a lot. And I mean, I definitely think they're wrestling with this recycling issue. And steel, I just want to come back around to this idea of steel being a major, by mass, I think it's 60-70% of a wind turbine at the moment. And so, Alon, there is a lot of discussion on the sort of OEM side about green steel being produced with hydrogen and other materials, which is a little bit, it's maybe tangential to circular economy per se, but what do you make of green steel? How is it really ready for prime time? Because it's a term I keep seeing come up, but I'm not quite sure whether it's something that's on the drawing board or something just around the corner.
Yeah, it's more like a preview of what's to come, because the short answer is no. I mean, green steel's not ready. There's a very small amount in the market currently, and demand is already pretty significant. But the technological pathway to get there is pretty established, and steel companies, particularly in Europe, who are under the most pressure, because you have the European ETS, a new phase where free allowances are being withdrawn. So increasingly, it's going to cost them if they keep producing steel via the blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace route, which is responsible for about 60% of the steel produced in Europe. They're just going to continue to emit huge tons of CO2, right? And when we know the steel industry globally, that ratio, by the way, globally is about 70% of steel is produced using the blast furnace route, and steel is the single biggest source of industrial emissions globally, at 7%. So what we're seeing is the industry has, by and large, settled on the other technological route, the other technology to produce steel, which is the electric arc furnace route. And that's, I mean, there are still some companies, particularly like bigger companies like ArcelorMittal, who have a very large global footprint, that are also looking at carbon capture and storage and other kind of more innovative solutions. But EAFs seem to be the established technology, and they could potentially reduce the carbon footprint of a ton of steel by 75 to 85%. To get us all the way down to kind of net zero, we need a hydrogen economy. So we need proper green hydrogen, and we actually need a hydrogen economy with proper business models and regulation around it set up by governments across Europe. When are we going to get there? I mean, probably, between, let's say, the early 2030s, mid 2030s, we might have enough green steel to start meeting supply. In the interim, what we're going to see, and what we're already seeing, is green premiums starting to develop for green products. So it really pays to be kind of a first mover in this space, because it just helps with the returns. And if you come in at the back end, now green steel supply has increased, that'll erode that green premium. It's going to knock your returns. Plus the rest of the world, including China's probably by that point also would have transitioned towards green steel. So it really does pay to do it early. The challenge steel companies have is it's very expensive to do. So the big 5 European steel companies, we estimate they're going to need to spend between $30 to $35 billion to decarbonize their operations. And we know steel companies don't make a lot of money, right? It's a very fragmented industry. Margins are razor thin, so they don't have deep pockets to do this. So they need government support and significant support. So a lot of companies are targeting for at least half of that, 30 to 35, to be provided by governments. So governments really have to dig deep into their pockets if they want to see green steel in meaningful quantities.
Christian, I want to probe on the green premium idea Alon just brought up. What's your sense for folks who are active in these kind of markets that you're helping to facilitate? Is this seen as a premium opportunity, or is this simply sort of more of almost like a scrap waste stream that you're managing?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that most of the companies that we work with have very strong environmental targets that they want to meet, and they see the circular economy as a great way to meet those goals. Usually the financial angle, especially if you compare it to their core business, is quite weak. I mean, they'll still make a little bit more money, but compared to their core business, it's almost nothing. So what we're seeing is that with some of the clients that we're working with, actually the results of our work results in huge environmental benefits for them. So like we work with one airport, and through our work, if you would translate that into carbon credits, would be worth about 80 million euros per year in carbon credits that will be reducing through working with us. So that will tell you, that's significant value that you're providing to them through applying circular economy principles.
Peter, I want to get your thoughts as well, just on the carbon angle. Do you see these platforms as helping to facilitate the push to get to net zero? Because I think that's part of the motivator for a lot of this. And so how do you see the race to net zero kind of feeding into what's happening with the platforms and the circular economy?
Yeah, so one interesting trend that we're starting to see is lack of confidence in offsets. So if offsets aren't yielding the confidence in the reductions that people hoped that they would achieve, you got to find someplace else to achieve those reductions. And it turns out we're talking here largely about supply chain and the ability to better accurately track. And you mentioned all the tracking technologies that you put in. So there's, I think, some interesting opportunities where these circular ideas and a platform can help manage that data and provide it back to the customers. So I guess an open question is that potentially a circular solution can get you more confidence in the carbon reductions than going the offset route. So you could see more companies investing in this, improving the processes, solving some of the complexities of these markets, and leveraging the power of platforms. So you could potentially see kind of this green finance community starting to redirect their attention in this space which they've largely ignored as far as I can tell, but it could become much more interesting, and you could see a lot more money flowing in this. And so we're seeing a convergence of factors. It's never one factor. It's this combination of resource scarcity, concern about the amount of time it takes to launch new mines, but not the incentives to invest now, plus the fact that these carbon offsets are losing some of their credibility. And so you could see a flow of investment coming into these circular platforms.
We would very much welcome that, to be honest.
Okay, there you go.
All right. Well, I think that's wonderful. And in fact, I think this is probably a good stopping point. We'd said we'd go a half hour. We're about 10 minutes over our time.
Okay.
So for anyone who's been listening, Peter, Christian, they're very easily found on Google. Just Google their name. You can get their contact info, full bio. It's out there. For Alon and I, we're on the terminal. We're green dots right now. Just shoot us an IB if you have any follow-up. And I would just note that, we regularly have conversations like this. So if you want to be on our distribution list, you want to reach out and talk more to any one of us about it, we're happy to do that at any time. And I would flag that if you happen to be in New York, we've got an in-person roundtable that will talk about the energy transition and some of the ideas and themes we've discussed here today, 1 week from today at 4:30 in the afternoon. So reach out if you want to attend that. And I look forward to being in touch. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Thank you so much, Peter and Christian, for joining this discussion here today.
Thank you. It's been great.